volunteers or part-time, they can go back and watch it at a later date. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Nice and early in the year. I know most people have sort of been back for maybe a week or two. So thanks for taking some time out. It's probably been a busy start to the year, as I'm finding anyway. So thanks for everyone's time. Just before we do get started, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we are gathered on today, a land on which we play our great game of Australian football. I acknowledge elders both past, present and emerging, and pay our respects to the Aboriginal connection to land, sea and spirit. Agenda. So as I've explained, it is pretty much going to be a session run by Jean, who I'll introduce shortly. I'm just going to go through a quick couple of updates before I hand over, because I know there's been quite a few consistent themes of emails I've been receiving over the last week. So firstly, just a couple of welcomes. I can see firstly from VAFA, the new umpire operations manager, Sir Stephen Privatera. So Stephen's on the line from VAFA, so welcome to the team. Stephen, he comes from a Football Victoria background, operating with the referees, so different code, but a very similar role. And I was talking to Steve the other day, he's come from managing 1,400 referees to managing 400 at VAFA. So hopefully it's a bit of a lighter load for you, Steve.
Thanks, Andrew. And
welcome.
Thanks.
Also, we've got down in Warrnambool, Gavin Sell is the new president of the Warrnambool District Football Umpires Association. So I'm sure we'll have Gavin in some of these sessions at some point throughout the year. And lastly, I'm not sure if Brenton was able to jump on. I can't see him at the moment, but the new AFL National Community Umpiring Manager is Brenton Sanderson. You might think that name is a bit familiar. It's because Brenton is the former Adelaide head coach and also Collingwood assistant coach as well. So we welcome Brenton to the team in community umpiring. Firstly, just quickly, a couple of updates. So Talent Academy. Firstly, umpire feedback. So this year we've already seen COVID is going to play a little bit of havoc still. So what I'm going to change up for everyone is I'm going to provide the feedback forms that we've been using the last 2 years to community coaches to complete on your academy umpires during their community games. That way it's going to give us more feedback to utilise throughout the year, and not just rely on 3 observations throughout the year, which some umpires were able to get last year. So going to provide that form more broadly. Skills and PD sessions, I'll have more info in the coming week. Hopefully one PD session will be confirmed very shortly, just waiting on the presenter to confirm a time for the first session. The Academy Accelerator squads and the April V-Line Cup squads, the talent coordinators and myself, we're going to meet in a couple of weeks once the NAB Girl under 17 games are finished, and we'll compile a list to invite umpires to those 2 squads. We'll send all that out to each of the umpire managers first, just to have you get some feedback from you, and then we'll invite the umpires. And just lastly, I know I've sent an update to all the umpire managers at the start of this week about the acceptance of nominations. So 264 umpires were nominated, 166 have accepted. If they don't accept and fill out the form, they can't participate in any face-to-face activities, because the NAB competitions fall under the AFL COVID policy, so we need to have their vaccination status checked off. I can see Brenton on the line now, so just a quick introduction to Brenton Sanderson, who is now the National Community Umpire Manager. So Brenton, welcome to the umpiring community in Victoria.
Thanks, Andrew, and I'm sorry for being late, guys. I just ran over with another meeting, so I'll just sit here in the background and watch. I spoke with Jean earlier in the week, so yeah, thanks to everyone for the welcome, and I'm sure we'll catch up soon. Well, hopefully online, but well, hopefully we can catch up in person soon.
Thanks very much, Brenton. Secondly, just Officials HQ, thanks for all your feedback. As it's coming through, I'm sending it off and getting responses from Tony Saunders and Tony Costanzo, and hopefully it's filtering through. There's a specialised group being put together for support in Victoria. Obviously, Victorian umpiring is a little bit different to how the other states are set up and operating. So as more information comes to light on that group and how it's being set up and who's being trained and whatnot, I'll pass that on. There is one more upcoming webinar in January, which is the reports and awards setup. The link is there, or you can head to umpireafl.com for that session to register. There is another umpire managers setup session in February, and then in March there is a whole bunch of webinars for all sorts of updates, whether it's season setup, awards, umpiring, etc. So head to Umpire AFL to follow any of the updates there. And that's the end of my update. I'll have a question period at the end, but today's session is mainly about safeguarding children, especially with some changes happening later this year with the standards that are going to need to be applied across the country. So I'd like to welcome Jean. I think this is the first time you've attended an umpiring workshop before. Maybe it's your second, but for anyone who hasn't met or seen Jean in a meeting before, welcome Jean to run the session. On mute.
Yeah, on mute. That's a good start, isn't it? Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. I think I might have met some of you early last year, but probably not everybody. I'd like to start as well by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands and waterways in which we meet, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and those who may become elders in the future. So, as I understand it today, there's a bit of mix of people on in terms of their roles and responsibilities around safeguarding. Some of you may have responsibility in terms of governance around child safeguarding policies and procedures and the implementation of those. And other people, maybe it's on the ground when you're working with umpires or with coaching. So it's a pretty long presentation because I've had to meld the two things together. So what I would say at the beginning of this is it gets pretty boring listening to me talk the whole time. So put up your hands, take yourself off mute with any questions you have as I go along. You don't have to wait till the end of them, and we can make this as interactive as we can. I'm just going to share my screen now, Andrew.
Go for it.
Can everybody see that?
We have got it.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so the purpose of this session, I'm breaking it up into two parts for everyone. So the first part is going to look at governance arrangements. So we've got what the changes are to the legislation in Victoria from July this year and what we're doing around that. What supports are available during that transition. And then the second half of the presentation is going to look at, safeguarding scenarios, practical advice around how we create safe behaviours and safe environments. And at the end, there's going to be some links and resources.
So Jean, we've got your second screen, not your PowerPoint.
Not my PowerPoint. So what are you actually looking at then?
Your second blank screen.
Oh, second blank screen. Well, that's not going to be much good, is it? Hold on a second. Okay. Tell me now if you've gotten this. Have we got that now?
Yep. No, back to your blank screen again.
Yeah, that's because it's the wrong presentation. Right, absolute failure at the get-go here. Sorry, guys. Let me pull it back up. So we're looking for umpires. I've been doing a few presentations this morning already, so I'm not surprised that I've gotten them mixed up. And I already feel talked out. Okay. Now, are we in the Vic umpires one? Can we see that?
Yep.
Yep.
There we go.
Oh, lovely. Great. I'm going to be turning to the side. I know I'm a small dot on the screen anyway, but I'm actually looking at a different screen here as I'm going to go through this with you guys. Okay, so we talked about what we're going to do today. So it's around broken up between legislation and governance arrangements from this year, and also around some safeguarding practical scenarios and behaviours and how we manage those. So at the beginning of this presentation, just to say that we are talking about child safety and safeguarding today, and there will be some information in relation to child abuse. So the content of this presentation, it can be uncomfortable for some people and also distressing for other people. So if you find the content of this presentation upsetting or triggering, please seek support afterwards. And I've popped up some information around support services there for people, which include 1-800-RESPECT, Lifeline, and Blue Knot. And I've also put in there, if you have any safeguarding queries after this presentation, anything comes to mind, you think of extra things, you can either shoot me an email directly at gnester, or you can send it to the child safety email inbox. So a recap on where we are at the moment. As most of you would know, we are bound by the Victorian Child Safe Standards here in Victoria. They came in 2017. So basically, any organisation that provides services, programs, facilities to kids are bound by these standards. So any organisation, so anybody that has an ABN and trades as a business, they have to have in place policies and procedures around safeguarding. So the 7 standards are up there for you to see. They're around strategies to embed a culture of child safety, and that's through leadership arrangements. It's about having a safeguarding policy in place and a public statement of commitment around child safety, having a code of conduct around what are expected appropriate behaviours with children, then screening, supervision, training, other human resource practices for new and existing staff, having processes for responding to and reporting suspected child abuse, and strategies to identify and reduce or remove risks of child abuse, so risk management in this space, and then strategies to promote the participation and empowerment of kids. So that last one is around kids having a voice, kids having a say in terms of the programs that they're involved in. So there are current standards, and they've been in place since 2017. And the Commissioner for Children and Young People in Victoria is the body who oversights those for us. In 2019, there was a review of those standards to see if they were still fit for purpose and were achieving what they were intended to achieve. And in that review in 2019, that was conducted by the Department of Health and Human Services, you had hundreds of organisations, from large sporting codes through to small sports organisations and clubs. You would have had private and public hospitals, out-of-home care, schools, anywhere that kids were involved. They all put in submissions around how they found the child safe standards, how they were working, what they could do to improve them. And one of the key things that came out of that was that across Australia, we have national principles that were mandated by all states and territories a couple of years ago. But Victoria was the only state that had legislation around child safe standards, and they had done that before the national principles came in. So for national organisations like ourselves, it's really hard that, you know, you had to abide by child safe standards in Victoria, and then you had national principles in other states, and you may have accreditation processes on top of that, depending on what the services are you deliver and what industry you're in. So it was beginning to become a real administrative burden for organisations around what they were meant to be doing and if they were doing things right. So the outcome of that review was to harmonise our child safe standards with national principles so that they were easier to follow and easier to understand. So 10 national principles, but Victoria has created an extra one, as we like to do. So as of July this year, we're going to have 11 new child safe standards. And we'll carry through the 7 that we already have, and then there's some new additions. So I've just popped them up there so you can have an idea of what we're looking at. So we've got establishment of culturally safe environment for Aboriginal and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kids, Then we have the standards that we have currently in place around leadership and governance, child participation, family community involvement, equity and diversity needs, human resource management, child-focused complaints process, staff education and training, physical and online environments, around continuous improvement so that we review and update our processes, excuse me, and child-safe policies and procedures. There's some brand new things within that, and these are the kind of 4 areas where they're brand new. So we've got involvement of families and communities in organisations' efforts to keep young people safe. So that's about giving families a voice to input to the services that are delivered through clubs. We've a focus not only on Aboriginal kids, but on also LGBTI plus children, and that's covered in Standard 5 around diversity and equity. How we manage the risk of child abuse in online environments. So as most of us know that have had kids and that have been in lockdown, you would have heard that there is an increase in grooming online and in online abuse over the last 2 years. So the new standards take that into account. And also more generally, just changes around governance arrangements, systems and processes to keep kids and young people safe. What that translates into is a few things. Previously, or still to date, we talk about child safeguarding and child safety. With the new standards, we actually move into the space of child safety and well-being. As most of us know, that's a pretty broad term. There's actually no universal definition on what well-being is. So what's required of us is to actually think about what well-being looks like within our sport. And for us, it could be things like junior concussion, for example. We need to consider that. Other things are being more responsive, as I said, to input from participants, so family and kids, making sure that they have a say around the policies and procedures that we have at club and association level, and that they're there to review those when the time comes. We also want to equip staff and volunteers to understand the signs of abuse and indicators of peer-to-peer abuse. See, there's a typo there. So I always say to people, you don't know what you don't know until you know. So in this space, you know, you ask half a dozen people what they think signs of abuse are. They'll go for the traditional things of saying it's physical abuse because that's something visual that you can see, or they may say sexual abuse. But there's an actual continuum in between that, which looks at bullying, looks at verbal abuse, looks at emotional and psychological abuse. And they're the things that are more likely to happen on a weekly basis at training sessions and at games on the weekend. And it's being aware that these things are actually classified as abuse as well. It's not just bad behavior, it's forms of abuse when it involves children and young people. So it's making people aware of what those types of abuse are. And also not just adult to kids, but kids to kids as well. Brand new is the creation of a child-friendly complaints process, and one that's culturally safe and easy to understand. Most complaint handling processes are geared at adults and not at kids. So it's about the creation of simple, easy to follow, easy to understand guidance for kids if they wish to make a complaint themselves. We're also looking at supporting staff and volunteers with responding to disclosures and providing disclosure reports. So what that means is you may have in some of your clubs or associations a designated person who deals with complaints or allegations. And it's about ensuring that that person and everybody else, because a kid could come up to any of us to tell us something if they trust us or they feel that they can tell us, what we actually say to them when they disclose something, and then what we do with that information. Research shows that kids can be easily re-traumatized if an adult doesn't believe them and how they respond to them initially when they tell them something. So it's being aware of how to respond and then what we do with that information, but also closing that out in terms of how we support that adult who was told that information, because some of this can be really triggering for adults. based on their own history and background, but also it's cumulative. So if you have a child support officer at club level, and they're hearing multiple complaints or allegations or disclosures, that can weigh on people. So we have to look after our staff as well and support them with actually processing that information. From a business perspective, there's new requirements around procurement policies to ensure the safety of kids if organisations contract third parties for facilities and services. And what that means is where you might have, food and beverage coming in, cleaning services, security services on site, where you're running programs with kids, or, on match day, ensuring those people that are around kids are safe to be around kids as well, and ensuring that's built into the contracts. One thing to come out of that review from 2019 was the need to actually regularly review our child safe practices. And this is through looking at the analysis of complaints and incident data. What that means is, for the most part, when you have a complaint system in place, it's reactive. You respond to information when you get that. And what we want to well, that'll always be the case, but what we want to look forward to now is actually using that data to actually be more proactive in terms of our communication. So if we know that we're getting a lot of complaints around the use of photography or digital devices, we want to be able to focus our energies in creating some training or comms around how to use those appropriately. So we're targeting what the issues are, and we're using that from the complaints data that we're getting in. Another area is around ensuring accessibility of resources, and by that I mean making sure they're easy to understand and there's translated versions as well. Most policy documents, well, my experience is that, they're not necessarily user-friendly. They're written in a certain language, which can sometimes be legalese and can be pretty hard to understand. And nobody really accesses them until something goes wrong as a result of that. And then they may need support to understand what it actually means. So this is really kind of honing in on making sure that what we produce and what we put out there is easy to understand for everybody. And that may involve translating them based on the profile of your community. If you have people from overseas where English is a second language, how do we actually engage with them? Do we need to translate our documentation so that they understand what we're saying? And last but not least, there I've put in involve stakeholders in review of policies and procedures. This kind of loops back around to engagement of families and communities. It's about ensuring that the policies we have in place are fit for purpose, and how we find out that is by engaging those that the policies affect. So, as I said, all these changes come in July, so it's a couple of months' time. Victoria has already had the standards in place for a number of years. So what you will find is you probably have baseline in place anyway in terms of your policies and procedures and your practices. What we need to look at is what's those gaps moving forward, so we match them between current and new standards. Each club will need to do that themselves to work out what they need to do, but we'll be able to support you with some of that as well. And what I've put up here is a few things that will be useful for all of you. One is a coaching module. At the moment, I'm working with Julia and Josh to develop an umpiring coaching module around safe behaviours, and that will be available, I think, in the next couple of weeks, which will be really good. It just kind of brings together what we discussed today in an easy to use format. It will talk around what our policies and procedures are, but what to do in certain scenarios as well. So that will be available to all umpires in the coming weeks. I'm also happy to come back and do some familiarization and awareness around our new resources. I've been developing a suite of resources across the board for different cohorts within the football community. So for kids, young people, families, coaches and volunteers, for umpires and officials, workforce. which cover off topics like understanding what abuse may look like, what safe behaviours are, understanding boundaries, supervision, what you do when somebody discloses to you. So I think I've got about 7 short resources that are for umpires and officials. They're currently being reviewed and should be available in the next month to 6 weeks as well. So that kind of puts a bit more meat on the bones around this, and they'll be good to actually go back and have a look at in terms of these kind of different topics. They're a bit more of a deep dive into each of the things that we'll be discussing today. With the changes to the standards, all the AFL policies and any other organisation, you have to update your current suite of policies and procedures. So that would be your safeguarding policy, your complaints policy, your code of conduct and your commitment statement. They all have to be updated to ensure that they cover off these new aspects for the standards in July. So I will be creating a generic, set of policies and procedures that will be available for yourselves to use, where you can use those and tailor them to your needs as well, and they'll come out mid-year. I put down here some additional supports and training through state agencies. These are all free, by the way, and available to anybody who wants to access them. So Sports and Rec Victoria, they have a safeguarding unit, and Alice Mack, who heads that, is available to discuss with you any questions you have around safeguarding from a state perspective and through Sports and Rec Victoria. I know that they have a newsletter that comes out on a regular basis as well that'll have updates on safeguarding, so it's probably worth contacting Alice and getting on that list for that. Vic Sport are always a good ally to have, and Fiona Jones, some of you may know Fiona. She is hosting a series of workshops. They started at the end of last year. They'll run throughout the first half of this year around safeguarding and getting yourselves ready for the new standards. So if you log on to Vic Sport, you hop on there to their calendar of events, you should be able to see when they're having free workshops around this. I've sat in on a few of them, and they're actually quite useful because you get a lot of different sporting organisations involved, from big ones to small ones. And you have that community of practice where you can learn from each other. And there's definitely no stupid questions or silly questions. There's people on those forums who haven't any safeguarding policies or practices in place as it is, and didn't know that they had to have them, which is baffling, but that's the truth of it. So, they'll have a fair amount of work ahead of them. But for the likes of ourselves, where we have those baseline procedures in place, it's really building upon them over the next couple of months to ensure that they're fit for a purpose moving forward. Last but not least, the Commission for Children and Young People. They have information on their website as well around the changes to the legislation, and they have mapping tables on there as well, so you can see where we go from current to new, and they'll have a list of resources for people as well if they want to delve into those different areas further. They also host free workshops on the standards and reportable conduct schemes and information sharing. So there's a bit on that as well if you want to log on there and have a look.
Jean, we've just got Adam from Sunraysia with his hand up. I think he's got a question for you.
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Thanks, Jean. So are those generic policies coming through from the AFL, when are they going to be made available to people to start, first having a look at, then introducing? Yeah, look, that's as soon as I get to them, Adam. So at the moment, I'm still mapping out some of the gaps for us. Yeah. And once I'm comfortable with that, I'll start doing developing those documents or updating our current policies and procedures, and then we'll create that. So you're talking about probably realistically late April, May for me to have those ready. Yeah, okay. But in saying that, Adam, Vic Sports, they will also have generic documents available for this. Yeah. Yeah, okay. They get funding from Sports and Rec Vic to develop these policies and procedures as well. So they'll have templates available in the coming months also. Yeah, because I'm just mindful with timeframes. Like we've been asked to, have all this, in place by July. as much as, we can put together a policy around child safe standards, as a volunteer organisation, we just don't feel comfortable in doing that without some guidance.
Yeah. Do you have one in place already?
Body. What's that?
Do you have one in place already?
No, technically not, but we do have some measures and stuff like that in place around working with children's checks. We've introduced a new constitution late last year saying that we are going to be adhering to child safe practices. But yes, no, to the answer to your question, no, we don't.
Okay. Well, safe space here then. We've known from the Commission listening in, which is a good thing. So what I would also say, and this is not to scare people, but the Commission for Children and Young People is the regulator for these. So at any point in time, they can ask any organisation to demonstrate compliance against these standards. To date, they haven't done that very often unless there's organisations that willfully are not complying, and they've picked them up on it a few times. But what became clear out of this review was they just weren't able to manage the sheer volume of organisations in Victoria that have to comply with this. There's 60,000 odd organisations in Victoria that are bound by these standards as it stands right now, 60,000.
Yep.
So with the changes to the standards coming in, there's changes to legislation as well, where each government department will be given powers to assess organisations' compliance. Okay, so there will be a serious focus on compliance over the next 18 months once these standards come into place. So everybody needs to get up to date in this. Yeah. So no time like the present to just start getting your head around it. As I said, I won't have those documents ready until late April, May. Vicsport may have templates available before that, so I'd keep an eye out for that in the meantime if you want to get started on that. Is there any other questions at the moment? Nope. Okay. Okay, so resources. I think I might have touched on this briefly. I'm creating a suite of resources. You can see there, they're all the different cohorts for resources at the moment, so it's quite full. For umpires and officials, there's about 7 resources. And as I said, they're going to look at what abuse may look like and understanding what it may look like, what you do if somebody discloses something to you, what you do in that moment to respond to them, but also who you have to report to. There will be a resource around professional boundaries, communication, supervision. So there'll be quite a bit. Some of them are like 2 pages. I think the first one around abuse is about 3 pages, and that's more in depth. But they will be made available in the next month or so for everybody to avail of. We'll also be creating some quick flicks cards. Is that right, Andrew? Which are actually physical little cards about the size of your palm that you put on your lanyard or your sports bag, and that'll have that kind of information, summary information available to you as well. So when you're out at a training session and something happens, it's rather than you going off, well, what am I meant to do in that instance, or do I have to go back and look that up online? You should have some key information on those cards available to you, and key phone numbers, and QR codes if you have to report something to the integrity platform, that kind of high level information as well. And then to kind of round that off, as I said, there's that module, that umpires coaching module, that's going to be made available online in the next few weeks as well, which will cover off this information again. So some practical information around what actual safe behaviours look like. So I always start with, when people say, what do we need to do? Well, I'll say, do you understand what your risks are? Because if you don't understand what your risks are, you can't build out from there. So you need to understand what your risks are to actually create strategies around creating safe environments and safe behaviours. So some of the common risks are around change room etiquette, around coaching relationships and supervision, one-to-one supervision, transports, giving lifts to and from places for kids, language and tone, social media use and photography, and gifts and grooming. Now, some of these may be more relevant than others to you, but I can definitely tell you, based on the data that I've seen internally, where issues come up with umpires are definitely around social media use and contacting people one-to-one. So somebody in a senior position contacting a junior umpire, so under 18s, one-to-one, sending explicit images and requesting explicit images, or just sending inappropriate texts, you know? So people understanding what your role is around professional boundaries and how you actually use social media and, you know, texting appropriately in those roles. Transport is another one that's come up in terms of issues around transporting kids, you know, stopping off at the bottle to buy underage, like kids, alcohol after training. Not on anyway, but certainly not in this role. And bringing kids to and from places without consent, or letting somebody like your manager know, or somebody more senior, or, you know, informing the parents before they actually take the kid in the car. And some of this stuff, like transporting kids, most of us would have grown up where we got a lift from the neighbor to go play sports, you know, because it was just easier to do that. And that's the way we think that that's okay to do that. But nowadays we can't. We have to have approval, pre-approval where possible. But if it's an emergency, just making sure that you contact parents and say, you know, we're going to drop the kid home. We're leaving now. We'll be there in 15 minutes. Those kind of things. So got a checklist here for you to have a look at. And this is only a summary. The documents that we're developing and that coaching module will have a lot more information, but this just kind of gives you a summary of some of the issues. So around change rooms, when umpires are changing, that adults should knock and wait for approval before entering. Where you have female and male umpires at a training session and there's only one change facility, just to think about that. Allow females to go in first and get changed. Give them 10 or 15 minutes to get changed before other people enter, and make sure you knock before you enter. If it's in a public area somewhere, or you have to use, you know, God forbid, public toilets to get changed, just making sure the area is safe. Like some of the old grounds, you know, where the toilets are still behind the clubhouse, may not be well lit in the evening or at night. This is more in winter time. Just making sure that they're actually safe for somebody to use beforehand. Under no circumstances are phones, cameras, or any recording devices to be used when people are in a state of undress in the changing rooms. Gets into the wrong hands, it's passed on from one person to the next person. We don't want to see that happening. And club staff should not be alone and unsupervised with a young person in a change room area. And this, you know, this conversation I've had with somebody else around, well, what do you do when you have a physio in, or you had a doctor called in, you know, and they need to use a room? Where possible, if there's only one room, you make sure that door is open and other people can see, or else there's a second adult or a friend of that young person in there with them. It should never be one-to-one. We only have to look at what happened with Athlete Day in the States in terms of, you know, what happened with doctors there. So it doesn't matter who it is. There shouldn't be one-to-one or there should be supervision. It shouldn't be a one-to-one scenario. Physical contact. I know this doesn't apply as much with umpires. There's not a huge amount of physical contact, but it's more about just appropriate contact and assisting with skills. Also, coaches, medical staff, they should always request permission first. So don't just start to, you know, touch a child or a young person without actually asking them, is it okay first and foremostly to do that? Touch that would appear to have sexual connotation to observers or involve intimate parts of the young person's body. That's not allowed. We'd all know that, but just it has to be spelled out there. And never initiate against a young person's wishes unless, you know, it is to prevent injury. Something happens and you have to act quickly. Photography, as we kind of said around change rooms as well, it's only photograph if consent has been given by the young person or the parent and guardian. And they should always, any images should be stored in a way that stops unauthorized access. So where photographs are being taken, you know, who are they being taken by? Has that been agreed? Do we know that they're secure? Are they held in a secure place? Are they used for the purpose that they've been agreed upon? How long are they kept and how are they destroyed? Like sometimes we know this happens more generally, that somebody might use a phone. They're asked to use their own phone to take a photograph or something. But what happens if that photograph is passed on to somebody else outside the club and then passed on to somebody else and it's used for other purposes? So you just need to be really, really mindful around the use of photography. Images, as I said, there are not to be used for any other purpose beyond what has been agreed. And I don't think this applies as much to you, but it does in other areas around just ensuring around the use of names and locations for kids, because if there's intervention orders between parents and one parent is not meant to know where a kid is, and then it's flashed up on a Facebook page or social media that, you know, John Rogers was playing this game here, that's information for somebody to find and be able to locate the child again. So you just need to be really mindful of that if there is any kind of intervention orders in place and around the use of the names of kids. So social media, I'm taking in here emails, text messages, WhatsApp groups, all of those kind of platforms where possible. All parents and guardians should always be included in the form of communication. Excuse me. Club staff are to abide by the AFL social media engagement policy, which I think has been updated. It's a bit old, but it's got to be updated. Club staff are not to communicate privately with a player on social media, and I referenced this early in the piece. This is one of the complaints we've seen in integrity around having coaches, umpire coaches, contacting junior coach or junior umpires privately on social media, in some cases harassing female umpires, junior umpires as well. That is not to happen. It needs to be made very clear that you're not to do that. You're in your capacity as a coach. That is your capacity. You have to act professionally at all times. And, you know, when these complaints come in, and this is not just for umpires, but across the board, I find that it's that age category of, say, 18 to 24, 25-year-olds that are more doing this, because, you know, they're not much older than a 17-year-old in some respect, and they see them as friends. They don't, you know, they don't necessarily understand the role that they've stepped into from a professional perspective, and they think it's okay. It's a generational thing. They think it's okay to contact somebody, you know, that's 16 or 17 and shoot them text messages. But in their capacity as an umpire or an umpire coach, that's not acceptable for underage. You need to stick within your WhatsApp group, or you need to ensure that parents are involved in that communication as well to lessen any of those issues. You're not to request to follow or friends or communicate with umpires on social media sites. Remember, friendly but not a friend. That's not your role to be a friend, unless you're friends outside of umpiring, your family friends, that's different. But if it's just somebody you meet at training or through the club, you know what your role is and what's appropriate. And club staff are not to require an umpire to keep a communication secret from their parents or guardian. So, you know, that's one issue that we had, for example, where an umpire said to a junior umpire, "This is just between us." Okay. That we don't want to do that. And that goes across all walks of life with kids. That's the one thing we always say to our own kids, you know, don't keep any secrets. You know, you're not in trouble, no matter what you did. You might be in trouble, but, you know, generally we'll say to them, you're not in trouble. You know, it's better if you tell us. And that's the case here as well. So no secrets. Transportation, always seeking parent or guardian's permission before transporting players where possible. You might have some instances where it's a regular occurrence where somebody brings a junior umpire, senior umpire is bringing a junior umpire to training because that's easier to do. If that's the case, we have developed a travel approval form that should be signed, filled in by the guardian, and that should be kept by the club administrator and have a record of that, that's the agreement for whatever period of time. It should only, and transport should only occur in circumstances that are directly related to football and umpiring activities. So it's not that they're, again, texting outside of training or game days and just saying, oh, I need a lift here. Can you give me a lift? Or can you help me out with doing stuff? Just remembering what the relationship is and maintaining those boundaries. And where you are transporting kids, just to be mindful that kids need to sit in the back of the car with a seatbelt on, that they know the travel times as well as the parents. So you say to the kid as well, you know, I just contacted your parents. I said, we're going to be there in 15 minutes. So the kid knows that as well. There has been cases, not in umpiring, but in other sports that I'm aware of, where kids had been transported from tennis training, and where it started out as once or twice. Then it became a regular thing because Nana was minding the kids on that Thursday evening, and it was hard for Nana to get to that training practice for tennis. So because the coach was so nice and had transported this kid a few times, they thought that was okay. And then over time, this coach groomed this young girl and abused her. And that's how it happens. That's how it pans out over time. So what we want to do is limit that, because from the time he took her out of the tennis practice to getting home, there was no alignment of time. There was no phone call. The grandmother just knew the kid would be back at some stage in the evening. Appropriate behaviours around overnight stays, camps, carnivals, just to keep this in mind, that it has to occur within a formal programme. So you're not taking a kid for extra training and practice for a night off somewhere, that it is always within a formal programme, and that there's written permission sought from parents and guardians in advance. Where there is camps, carnivals, there should be a minimum of 2 supervising adults on that. Better if you have 3 or more, but a minimum of 2 on any overnight stay, and make sure that there's a gender balance. So you have male and female, if you have male and female umpires attending as well. Children and young people have the right to contact their parents or guardian at any time during the stay. I don't know if this is as relevant now because most kids have mobile phones and they're able to contact their parents when they want. But, you know, there has been incidents in other sports where you're there for a training camp. We take your phones and we'll tell you when you can contact your parents, you know. So that's not the case. They should be able to contact the parents when they need to, and equally the parents should know who the contact is, the supervising adult at the carnival is, or the camp, that they can contact if they need to ask anything. Where you're staying in a hotel or at a camping ground, it's not the responsibility of the staff to look after the kids or young people. It's your responsibility. So you need to ensure that at all times there's one supervising adult within the umpires that are able to do that. And that's where you may have a roster, you know, because obviously you guys need a break as well. Anybody that's on a camp or carnival will know that's pretty hard work looking after kids 24/7, so that you have rostered on your own breaks and you know when somebody's looking after the kids at different points in time during the day or the evening. And also not to allow unsupervised or inappropriate sleeping arrangements. I am developing an overnight stay policy or guideline, which goes into a lot more information and gives you examples around rostering, etc. And that should be ready in the next 6 weeks. So you'll have access to that as well, which kind of puts more meat on this and what we're discussing. Professional boundaries. This is an interesting one for me in terms of the complaints that we see coming through. It's generational, I would say, where we get a lot where there is inappropriate behavior from coaches to kids, and that's where they're shouting at them quite a bit, or, you know, nearly bullying them because they think that's going to improve their performance. So we need to be really careful around how we behave towards children and young people, but also how we behave to each other, because kids watch the whole time. They're able to feel that vibe in terms of how coaches might interact with each other. And if they think that's okay for them to talk to each other that way, that's okay for them to talk to other kids that way as well. So just remember that, you know, you got your professional hat on that day, and that's how you're to interact. Always engage positively. And I know that's hard. I know that's hard with kids because sometimes they'll wear you down, but just remembering that we try to use positive language where we can. And if you feel that you can't for some reason, that you step aside, assistant coach, some other adult comes into that space and you get a break from that. But also always around using positive language. A lot of complaints that I see are around coaches cursing at kids, and just using derogatory language, which if that occurs on a regular basis and it's targeted at certain kids, that's a form of abuse. It's bullying and it's a form of abuse that can be reported. Avoid one-to-one unsupervised situations where you can. So you want to have a chat with a kid about something, rather than bringing them into a room to have that privacy. Take them out into the middle of the oval, do a lap walking around, have a chat. Just make sure that you're out in the open and other people can see you at all times where possible. Where that's not possible, make sure that there's another adult or supporting person for the kid with them as well. Avoid engaging or seeking to engage with kids outside of the club activities and programs. And this comes back to what we were saying about, your role is to coach them. It's not to be their friend. It's not to inquire of their family. It's not to go to barbecues with the family on a Saturday or anything else, unless you're an actual family friend. But apart from that, that's not your role. Yeah, so keep your role within the professional boundaries of what it is. And avoid developing special relationships with kids. And this comes down to grooming. So it's about singling out certain kids where, genuinely, you might like the child, you might think they have more potential, you want to give them that one-to-one, and that, we try to limit that where we can, and not singling out certain kids, because that not only affects the kid, but it'll affect the rest of the team as well, or your other umpires if they see that happening. So we try to limit that. And last but not least, engage in open discussion of a mature nature in the presence or with children and young people. That's what I mentioned before, just around professional boundaries and how we speak to each other. Kids are always listening, so we need to make sure that adult content is kept for adults outside of that arena where kids are during training and game day. I just popped this in here around recognizing what abuse actually is, because, different people have different views, as I said, on what abuse actually is. But these are the types of abuse that are identified in the standards and through the policy documents around child safeguarding. So as we said, we've got physical and sexual, which is the ones we're probably most familiar with. Then grooming, emotional abuse, and that's psychological abuse and how you speak to kids, etc. Neglect, and also bullying. So these are all forms of abuse, and they can happen in a variety of circumstances and with different people. So in a footy sense, and for you as well, it's, it's during training, before and after games or programs, at events, club events, potentially, or through relationships at the club and the program. Traveling to and from games and training, that can happen in cars and buses and overnight stays and trips, and from the sidelines as well. We know what parents are like. We know what other people are like from the sidelines when they're passionate about things. So these we know that's a form of abuse that happens a bit from the sidelines. So recognizing what those different forms are, because there will be some people who don't classify you shouting at a kid as a form of abuse. That's just getting them to play better, run faster, train harder. But if that is singling out certain kids, it's making them feel uncomfortable, it means they may not turn up to training, they might drop out, all because of how they were treated. And that's classified as abuse in this sense. So what do we do if somebody actually tells you something? And I talk about 3 R's. So recognizing what abuse is, responding to that, and then reporting it. So that's really important, how recognizing is understanding what the forms of abuse are and what somebody's trying to tell you, how you respond to it in the moment with the child, and then how you report it and who you report it to. So if you've any concerns at all, about somebody, you should do something about it. If you've heard something, you've witnessed something, be it an incident, inappropriate behavior, or if you have a complaint to make, supervisor or manager, first port of call, have that conversation around what it is. And you can also make a report through the integrity platform. And I urge people to do that, even if they have a conversation with your supervisor and manager, because we can collect that data. We can see what the issues are cumulatively across umpiring and football, and we can do stuff about that. So it's really important to get that data in. Plus, our integrity officers are trauma response trained. So they know how to engage with people when something happens and how to follow up with them. I put the QR code in there, but the links are there online as well. So these are the different things that you can actually make a report about. So it's sexual offences, misconduct, all those things, bullying, neglect, physical violence. If a kid is in immediate danger, kid tells you something's happening at home, they can't go home, they're too scared something's going to happen, 000, you call VicPol straight away. If you are concerned that something is wrong at home, you can also contact Child Protection, and what they will do is they will triage it based on the information you give them. It's always better to make the call and just have that conversation around, what your concerns are, and either VicPol or Child Protection will work it out from there for you. We have a legal obligation to do that. And last but not least there, I've just put in that child safety at AFL email address again. So that's for any general queries you may have with regards to safeguarding, or you can contact me directly, that's fine. So conscious of time, just quickly, safeguarding health check. You need to normalise safeguarding and having that chat about safeguarding as much as you talk about, risk or OH&S at your weekly meetings or quarterly meetings. It's about just normalizing that conversation so it just becomes part and parcel of what we discuss, and that's held on a regular basis with your staff. Okay, I think sometimes people think about this, it's compliance, you have policies and procedures, you've ticked that box, you park it. You don't actually look at them until something goes wrong. But if this becomes part of the regular conversation, I think you're more alert to issues, and it creates more continuous improvement as well around your practices. It's a shared responsibility. So even though you might have appointed somebody as a CSO, everybody is responsible around child safety. We all have a duty of care, and a duty of care to understand all of this. So make sure there are people in your clubs and associations know about it. The aim here is we want to keep kids in sport. They enjoy it, they get to play with their friends, they get to improve their health, they want to be part of something. So to do that, we need to ensure that they're kept safe, but we also need to ask them what makes them feel safe as well, because we don't know that. There's certain things that kids will think that are more important than what we think. So it's important to engage them as well. And there on the right hand side, that's your compliance end, making sure that you've got your safeguarding policy and procedures, your code of conduct, your complaints procedure, commitments, all in place, that you use that, understand how to use that complaints data as well. If you're getting complaints indirectly, looking at those on a quarterly basis and saying, hey guys, we've had 10 complaints about people inappropriately texting junior umpires. What are we going to do about that? Do we need to revisit this around our our digital technology policy, or what Jean gave us around the use of social media and digital technologies? So it's just reviewing that and understanding that. And I've popped up some other resources here as well. If you need to do any training around safeguarding or familiarize yourself outside of here, Play by the Rules offer a free course. CEP, so Sports Integrity Australia, just launched a new course. That one's a bit longer than 20 minutes, might be about half an hour to get through, but they're both free. They're both there, and they're worth a look in doing that. Play by the Rules also has some good tip sheets around interactions with kids that are worth looking at. And I've mentioned previously Vic Sport. The The Safety Commissioner is another one for you guys to consider. And Andrew, this might be something you might get. The E-Safety Commissioner will come talk to sports administrators about how to stay safe online and safe communications with kids online for sports. I think you need about 30 people to attend. If you've got a quorum of 30, they'll come and do the presentation. They'll probably do it for less anyway, online. It's free. And it's worth getting them out to have a chat about this as well from an e-safety perspective, because there's quite a bit in that, not necessarily just around how adults interact with kids, but also peer-to-peer, making sure that it's appropriate between the peers as well in terms of their interactions online. So it's worth getting them out to do a talk for you guys as well. I've put in a link there to the table of changes for those who are in charge of safeguarding policies and procedures and updating them. If you go onto the Commission's website, that will tell you what's new and you can have a look at that. And last but not least, some consultancy services outside of us that you can look at independently if you want independent advice. Child Safe Australia, just to let you know, they're running a series of lunchbox sessions between February to April, so one a week, an hour long, looking at child safety and what you need to do to implement the new standards. And they're doing a special price of $2.99 for the 11 standards for the AFL. The code is AFL, and that then is recorded and you can use it to disseminate to your networks as well. So if you jump on there, it's worth having a look at that. Sorry, everybody's coming back in. I did pretty well, didn't I? I got through the hour without any any kids coming back in. And that is it. Perfect timing. So I know there's a huge amount of information in there. Most you probably won't remember. But if you've got this recording, definitely go back through it. I think from a governance perspective, it's really about ensuring that your policies and procedures are up to date and filling those gaps between what's current and new, getting your head around that and understanding what needs to be done. And just generally from a coaching perspective, training perspective, understanding those safe behaviours in those environments, like change rooms, like transport, use of digital technologies and social media platforms, they're really important as well.
Thanks very much. Now, timed it perfectly. Is any questions for Jean before we let her go?
There might be questions after this, once you've had a time to digest it. So just shoot me an email or give me a call. Happy to go through stuff with you. And know that you'll have that coaching module, online coaching module in the next few weeks. You'll have a set of resources for umpires and officials, and then those little pocket-sized cards, those physical cards that you can attach to your bag or your lanyard in the next couple of months as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jean, for your time. And yeah, if anyone's got anything else, please reach out to her or myself. I've been working really closely with Jean over the last fair few months to make sure that we get everything, I guess, right and it's useful for everyone. It's not just a wasted resource. So please reach out to her if you need it.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, I'll turn off now. I think it's lunchtime. Okay, take care, and I'll chat to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. For everyone else, I'll just go back to my updates at the start there. Was there any questions around Officials HQ or the Academy stuff that I just went through quickly? Or if there's anything else on anyone's mind just want to ask or shoot out or put out there before I'll let you get on with the rest of your day.
What sort of interruption do you expect with the NAB Girls games, Tallow?
I have no idea.
Games, that's all.
Yeah, I have no idea. Well, we had two games were cancelled last weekend. So the game that was down in Geelong was cancelled, and there was one here in Metro, but a Metro game was cancelled. I know Dandenong, they try to make up a game, which was Tuesday night, which they did that. So I'm not sure if Geelong or Knights will try and do the same. But we just have no idea. I guess it just depends on what their players are returning when they're doing their rat tests and whatnot, whether it's a training or game day, or I'm not sure when they're doing them, but it just depends on what the clubs are, what players they've got access to. So, you know, if they're getting a lot of positives, they'll probably fill their 19s teams first, and then the 17s will suffer. So we'll just have to see. I think there's only one more weekend of the 17s left, and then with the 19s, yeah, we'll just have to. We'll just see how we go.
Tal, I'll put in the chat there just Jean's contact details.
Yeah, I'll include that when I send out the recording tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I'll also get a little bit more information about that little the webinars that she just spoke about. The deal to get that for $299. I know that series is $50 a webinar, or they're offering $500 for all 11 webinars, but the AFL have a special deal with them. So I'll send out that info as well.
Jeez.
Okay, well, if there's nothing else there, I'll let everyone get on with their day. Thanks again for your time again. I know it's probably been a busy start to the year for everyone with COVID still interrupting and playing havoc with us, but thank you for everyone who's been really flexible the last week and a half with academy appointments and whatnot as well. So if there's anything else in the meantime, please reach out, and I'll be in touch with everyone in due course. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.